Someone tells you they're a Stoic. What do you picture? Probably someone who never cries at funerals. Someone who shrugs when they lose their job. Someone who watches the world fall apart and says, with a completely flat face, "It is what it is." That picture is everywhere. It's in the memes. It's in the self-help books. It's in the way people use the word Stoic as a compliment for being emotionally unreachable, and it is almost completely wrong. The Stoic philosophers, Marcus Aurelius, Epictetus, Seneca, did not teach people to suppress their emotions. They didn't want you to feel nothing. They wanted something far more precise and far more difficult. Here's how the confusion started. The Stoics used a Greek word, apatheia. You can already see the problem. That word looks like apathy, and apathy in modern English means not caring, emotional deadness, checked out. But apatheia didn't mean that, not even close. Apatheia meant freedom from pathē, from runaway passions built on false judgments. Not the absence of feeling, but the absence of being hijacked by feeling. It was a word about mastery, not emptiness. To be precise about what that means, the Stoics did want freedom from passions, but by passions, they meant irrational, runaway judgments. They did not mean becoming a blank, loveless machine. But somewhere in the 2,000 years between ancient Athens and your Instagram feed, the translation got flattened, the nuance got lost, and Stoic became a synonym for someone who has locked their emotions in a room and swallowed the key. The problem with that version of Stoicism is that it doesn't actually work. Modern psychology distinguishes between suppressing an emotion's outward display and actually changing the judgment or interpretation beneath it. And those two things produce very different outcomes. The Stoics understood this long before the research existed. That's why the real philosophy is completely different. The Stoics built one of the most sophisticated theories of emotion in the ancient world. And the foundation of that theory is a distinction most people have never heard of. They divided emotional responses into two categories. The first category they called pathē, usually translated as passions. These were not emotions in the neutral sense. These were emotional reactions driven by false judgments, distorted thinking that took over before reason had a chance to respond. Think of the pathē as the emotional reactions that happen when your mind is lying to you. Fear of things that aren't actually threatening. Anger, disproportionate to what happened. Desperate craving for things you've decided you cannot live without. Crushing grief that says the world is over when it isn't. The Stoics weren't saying those feelings are immoral. They were saying those feelings are built on mistaken beliefs about what is real and what matters. The emotion isn't the problem. The false judgment underneath it is. And here is where the second category comes in, because this is the part almost nobody talks about. The Stoics called them eupatheiai, good emotions, rational emotions, emotions that arise from seeing the world clearly. The Stoics mapped three of them specifically, where irrational fear becomes distorted. Rational caution takes its place. You see a genuine risk and you respond with measured alertness. Not paralysis, not panic. Appropriate, proportionate caution. Where irrational craving becomes grasping, rational, reasonable wishing takes its place. You want something good, for yourself, for others, and you hold that desire without being enslaved by it. You prefer it, but you're not destroyed if it doesn't come. And where shallow, reactive pleasure becomes distorting, rational joy takes its place. Not the spike of dopamine when something goes your way, a deep, stable gladness that comes from living in accordance with your values. Joy that doesn't depend on external circumstances. This is not a philosophy of emotional suppression. This is a philosophy of emotional refinement. The Stoics weren't trying to eliminate your inner life. They were trying to build a better one. Let's go to the sources, because this is where it becomes undeniable. Marcus Aurelius was the Roman emperor for almost 2 decades. He was also a committed Stoic who kept a private journal, what we now call meditations. He never intended it for publication. It was a man talking to himself, trying to get better. And if you read it expecting someone who felt nothing, you will be surprised on almost every page. He writes about irritation with difficult people, fear of death, the shortness of life, temptation, failure, and the constant need to examine his own judgments. In Meditations 2.1, he even prepares himself each morning to deal with ungrateful, arrogant, and deceitful people, not by pretending they won't affect him, but by thinking through his response in advance. He doesn't pretend those things aren't happening. He doesn't perform invulnerability. What he does, over and over, is examine the experience. He asks, what is the judgment underneath this feeling? Is that judgment true? That's not suppression. That's scrutiny. Seneca is even more direct. In Letter 63, written specifically on grief for a lost friend, he does not say, feel nothing. He does not say the wise man is untouched. He says grief should not become endless performance or total collapse. His line is blunt. We may weep, but we must not wail. Read that slowly. We may weep, but we must not wail. That is the Stoic middle path, not a hardened heart, not surrender, something precise and harder than either, grief that is real, but grief that does not consume the one grieving. And then there is Epictetus, a former slave who became one of the most influential philosophers in history. The opening of his Enchiridion, chapter 5, contains what may be the most important sentence in all of Stoic literature. He says that people are disturbed not by events themselves, but by the judgments they form about events. Notice what he didn't say. He didn't say events don't matter. He didn't say pain isn't real. He said the judgment, the meaning you assign, is where suffering is generated or dissolved. Change the judgment, and you change your emotional reality, not by forcing yourself to feel nothing, by seeing more clearly. So what does this actually look like in practice? Because that's the real question. Philosophy doesn't live in the text. It lives in Monday morning, when someone sends you a message that makes your blood pressure spike. The Stoic practice isn't to suppress that spike. It isn't to tell yourself, I shouldn't feel this. That approach doesn't work, and the Stoics knew it. The practice is a pause, a moment of examination. What the Stoics called stepping back from the impression, the initial hit of emotion, and asking a simple question before you respond. Is what I'm feeling based on something true? Sometimes the first reaction is understandable. Something genuinely painful happened. Something unjust occurred. The Stoic question here is not, how do I pretend I don't care? The question is, do I need to give this first reaction my full assent? You can respond to injustice with courage and with justice without letting anger become the driver. The first reaction, visits. You don't have to hand it the wheel. Sometimes the answer is no. You feel fear about something that hasn't happened and probably won't. You feel humiliated by something that matters far less than your brain is insisting. You feel anxious about something you have no control over whatsoever. That's where the work is. Not suppression, correction. You don't push the feeling down. You examine the belief underneath it. And when the belief is false, the feeling starts to lose its grip naturally. Not because you forced it away, because the ground it was standing on gave way. This is why Stoicism, done correctly, actually makes you more emotionally present, not less. You stop wasting emotional energy on things that don't deserve it, and you have more of yourself available for the things that do. We live in a culture that gives you two options for difficult emotions. Option 1. Express everything immediately, loudly, and with total abandon. Option 2. Toughen up, push it down, don't be weak. Neither of those is wisdom. The Stoics were offering a third path 2,000 years ago, and it's more relevant now than it has ever been, precisely because the world has never been louder or more designed to hijack your emotional responses. Every notification, every headline, every comment section is engineered to produce a path reaction in you. Fast, automatic, before reason gets a vote. Stoicism is not telling you to feel nothing in response to that world. It's telling you to slow down enough to ask what's actually true, to feel what deserves to be felt, to respond from your values rather than your nervous system. That's not emotional suppression. That is emotional sovereignty. If this reframed what you thought Stoicism was, that's exactly the kind of thinking we go deeper on here. Next, a different question. What happens when someone does everything right, works hard, achieves what they set out to achieve, builds the life they planned, and still wakes up one morning feeling nothing? Two of the oldest philosophical traditions in history saw that coming, and their answer is not what you'd expect. Subscribe and hit the bell. And if this shifted something, share it with someone who thinks Stoics don't feel anything. They will be surprised